The US election is one of the key moments for the markets this year, as there's still no indication of how the budget deadlock will be broken on Capitol Hill. Professor Robert Singh is a US politics expert, and I asked him who got the biggest bump after the recent Democratic and Republican conventions, Mitt Romney or President Barack Obama.
Obama seems to have the upper hand, although neither of them seem to have really benefited much from the conventions in the way that you usually expect. But I think overall the Democrats came through better than the Republicans did. The Republicans were a little lackluster. Romney would usually, or the challenger would usually, expect a sort of 5 to 7% bounce out of the convention. Romney initially seemed to get about 1%, and now that's been shot because of the Democrats following up. So at the moment it seems to me that Obama's probably just had a slight advantage, but it's negligible overall.
Why do you think that Romney failed to get a bounce? Is it his lack of ability to connect with an audience? He has this very robotic way of speaking compared to Barack Obama, who, no matter what you say about his politics, is a great speaker.
It's about taking risk, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, but
I think that's right. I mean, I think there are a number of factors. I mean, partly the Republican convention was overshone by the threat of the hurricane, and so they had to cut it short anyway. There wasn't much media coverage by the networks in any case, about an hour in the evening. The Clint Eastwood moment actually just really backfired and seemed incoherent and pushed Romney out of the primetime spotlight as well.
I wondered about, when what do you want me to tell Romney? I can't tell him to do that. Can't do that to himself.
But as you say, I think the more telling aspect is that partly Romney's a pretty wooden campaigner at the best of times, but also the party didn't really seem to be projecting any coherent vision for the future other than Obama hasn't worked, it's time to kick him out. And I think it's difficult, even in this particular economic climate, to really triumph over an incumbent president if you haven't got something to sell as a coherent vision.
But doesn't history tell us that Barack Obama cannot be re-elected simply because the unemployment rate is so high?
You would think that, and every economic forecaster, every political scientist would typically say there's no way an incumbent president could get re-elected with unemployment over 8%, 42 successive months of effectively stalled growth and so forth. But it hasn't happened, and indeed when you look to the Electoral College strategy rather than just the national popular vote, Obama's actually in the lead pretty much in all of the key swing states. And I think there's a case that whereas typically you would say, as Romney is trying to do, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And if the answer's no, the incumbent would be out. Arguably, because of the recession being so severe, actually the expectations of most Americans as to where they would be after just 4 years are pretty dampened down. And in a perverse way, Obama has benefited from just how severe the recession has been.
There's also a lot of discussion about family values, and the moralistic side of it really came out, especially from the two wives of Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Mm-hmm. Do morals have a big role to play in this election, or does it all just boil down to economics?
I think at the margins there's certainly a role, not necessarily so much in specific policies as such, but more as casting Romney especially as being out of the mainstream. This was self-inflicted during the Republican primaries, and the Obama campaign and Democrats very successfully exploited that in the spring, raising up the issues of traditional Republican positions on abortion, women's rights, equality, same-sex marriage, and so forth. So it's really there, I think, not necessarily that it's going to decide the election, but it embellishes the portrait that the Democrats are trying to paint of Romney as someone who simply doesn't understand ordinary Americans and is, in a way, just too peculiar to put in the White House.
Okay, so what does Mitt Romney have to do, because he does stand apart from Americans, the average American, doesn't he, because he's so wealthy? So what does he have to do over the coming weeks to try and turn things around?
Well, I think he's got two tasks really to have any hope of winning. The first is to sell clearly what his economic policy is going to be and how that will positively affect ordinary middle income Americans. And I don't think he's done that thus far. It's a difficult sell because of picking Ryan and effectively making the election a choice rather than just a referendum on Obama's incumbency. But the second thing he has to do, and they started a little bit at the convention, but I think it was probably too late to do this, is to portray himself as an individual, as somebody who is not only personally successful, but is actually in touch with mainstream Americans, is the candidate you'd like to go and have a beer with, is the one that you can imagine coming over for dinner. And with just the debates effectively left, plus the TV advertising to do that, that's going to be a really uphill struggle, I think, for the Romney campaign.
So let's say that Barack Obama does get re-elected. Won't that be a disaster in terms of trying to sort out Capitol Hill and pass this budget?
Unfortunately, in many ways, yes. I think, although they can't really say it and are reluctant to say it, in some ways Romney's strongest card is to say, if you put Obama back in the White House and he's facing at least a Republican House, possibly a Republican House and Senate, what are the possibilities for them actually striking a deal, however severe the fiscal cliff that's looming is? If Romney was there with a Republican Congress, at least they would collectively have to face the burden together of dealing with this debt and deficit issue or being punished at the next elections. It does seem to me, as you say, that if Obama gets in, I can't see where the incentives are for either party, a Republican Party that's going to be even further to the right after the 2012 elections, and a Democratic president who really is still unwilling to cut entitlement programs and so forth by the kind of severe reductions that the Republicans are suggesting. How are you going to get the compromise that's necessary in January 2013?
How close do you think this election is going to be? I've been speaking to some people who expect it to come down to some very small specific areas and states. Do you think it's going to be a very close election like 2000?
I had thought that, and I had thought it would possibly be 49 versus 48, something like that. But I think the lead that Obama is beginning to open up over Romney, particularly in the key swing states, I think it's going to be more comfortable than many of us thought. Still a narrow popular vote advantage. I would imagine it would be at most 50-51% for Obama. But I think in those key states, in particular places like Ohio, Florida, Virginia, it's difficult to see how Romney now can actually win those, and without them he's effectively finished.